In our rush to seal our homes from the cold, we mustn't forget we've got to live in them too. And a rush it truly is. In the last decade or so, we've seen significant changes in how we build our new homes, with ever more airtight construction and better insulation. And our existing stock is not immune from these changes either. It's widely recognised that we've got to change the vast majority of our built environment if we're going to meet the climate challenge. But the truth is, we're still a very long way behind when it comes to our thinking on ventilation and air quality in our homes. In this video, we're going to talk about why this should be important to us all. We're going to have a look at how we might start to define adequate or good ventilation in our homes. And we're going to look at three principal pillars of ventilation and how we should reframe the narrative of what success is. And if you stick around to the end, we'll have a look at what this new frontier of ventilation might look like, what perhaps is a fourth pillar. The truth is, we're an indoor generation, and we spend up to 90% of our lives indoors. This means, objectively, if you're lucky enough to live to 80 years of age, or let's say your kids are lucky enough to live to 80 years of age, they're going to spend 70 years of their life indoors, and 55 years of that time in their own home. The fact of the matter is, the quality of the air that we breathe in our homes and the performance of our ventilation systems has a fundamental impact on our long-term health and well-being. And one of the profound things that I've had to wrap my head around in the last few years has been the fact that even the vast majority of our exposure to outdoor air is going to occur indoors in our own homes. And the thing is, air quality remains the single largest environmental risk we face as a human species on our long-term health and well-being. And I'm not exaggerating here. Poor air quality costs the UK Exchequer close to 20 billion per year in healthcare costs, illness, loss in productivity, and so on. In the United States, the cost to the healthcare system of cardiovascular disease and respiratory conditions alone as a result of poor air quality is in excess of $800 billion per year. The cost of air quality to our society globally is almost incalculable. But even if we look at something specific like asthma, for example, in the UK alone, close to 5.5 million people suffer from that condition. Across Europe, the numbers are somewhere between 30 and 50 million people. That's 10% of all Europeans suffer with asthma. In Ireland, where I live, every 4 minutes, somebody is admitted to hospital with an asthmatic condition. And asthma is a condition we know is significantly exacerbated by poor indoor environments. And studies consistently show the link between poor indoor environments and poor respiratory outcomes. Poor indoor environments like condensation, damp, and mould in our buildings. In a 2022 report from the US, it found that somewhere around 47% of all US homes had some form of condensation, damp, and mould in their properties. Across Europe, it's estimated that close to 80 million people live in homes with damp and mould. And things like damp and mould and condensation in properties, poor air quality outcomes, and poor environments, a fundamental pillar for dealing with this challenge is ventilation. And ventilation is something we don't get right nearly enough. In a recent survey of UK homes, it was found that close to 75% of homes fail to meet even minimum standards for modern regulations. And the picture isn't much better across Europe, for example. A study that was conducted a couple of years ago found that up to 55% of European homes were significantly underventilated, compounded by the fact that nearly 75% of homes were being used in a way that wouldn't have led to a good outcome anyway. And the most striking study was conducted a few years ago in the UK that looked at the performance of naturally ventilated homes in modern airtight buildings. And these homes were given to this study, new homes by developers, one would assume, as their best foot forward. 95% of the properties in that study failed to meet even minimum standards when it came to regulations. So we've got a fundamental problem here, a misalignment, a framing problem, a core understanding of what good looks like. We're just not getting something right when it comes to ventilation. And I believe we need to fundamentally change the narrative and what we consider a good outcome. You see, the challenge is we're kind of hardwired not to think about breathing, not to think about the air quality that we breathe. It's a kind of basic instinct to do that. And as such, it's just not something we're aware of day to day and hour to hour. If we don't like the look of water or the taste of food that we're eating, we can make a choice not to consume that for a few hours and wait until we get home. We don't get that choice with air quality. And as such, we kind of leave it in the background for others to sort out. And one of the results of this has been we've kind of assumed because standards exists and there are suppliers and products out there that somehow they're looking after us. And objectively, that's not happened. And sometimes I think it's because we get fixated on the product and the solution rather than the fundamentals of what we're trying to achieve with ventilation. And this is where we're going to break down 3 fundamental pillars of adequate ventilation in our homes. 1, background ventilation. 2, local exhaust ventilation. And 3, purge ventilation. And the first one we're going to look at is background ventilation. Sometimes referred to as general ventilation or whole house ventilation, but fundamentally, this is the ventilation that happens in a property by design that stops the build-up of pollutants over time by the regular renewal of the air in that space, typically replacing it with cleaner outdoor air. We understand and have understood the importance of this fundamental building block of our ventilation for decades. And we often refer to the amount that's needed in terms like the amount of air that we change per hour in a space, or the litres per second or cubic feet per minute of air that we need to bring in to deliver that. It's fundamentally the thing that happens in the background 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, that stops the build-up over time of pollutants and moisture and viruses and bacteria that if we didn't renew that air regularly, we'd start to see a deteriorating conditions within our space. And this fundamental building block, this critical pillar of ventilation in our homes, is often where we see performance falling short. So we have to start asking the right questions as to how we're going to deliver the right amount of background or general ventilation in our properties. How do we quantify this? How does somebody stand over that this is being delivered? The second part to decent ventilation in our properties is good local exhaust ventilation. We recognise that there are certain rooms in our property or certain activities that are conducted in certain rooms of our buildings that need decent extraction of those pollutants at source. Rooms like bathrooms and en-suites, kitchens, utilities and laundry rooms, all of the spaces that produce specific and significant quantities of pollution need that pollution extracting at source before it spreads around the property. And as such, depending on whether they are intermittent, they come on just when those activities are happening, or they speed up from a background rate, we recognise that the rates of extraction need to be significant enough to remove those pollutants before they spread around the property. And again, this is often where we fall short, whether it's cooker hoods or whether it's extract fans in bathrooms. we very rarely find that they're capable or effective enough to remove that pollution before it spreads around the property. And we see this in data all the time when we're measuring properties, whether that's the spillage of cooker pollutants out of the kitchen around the rest of the house, or whether that's moisture falling out of the bathrooms into the bedroom areas because we haven't extracted that moisture at source effectively enough. And the third critical pillar that's often overlooked is our ability to purge a building. And we often do that through openable windows and doors and shutters and blinds. And this effectively is our ability to throw our buildings wide open for circumstances where it's necessary. Think DIY, painting, decorating, other activities that require us to air the home. It's so important for people to have access to openable spaces in their buildings. Have you ever stayed in a hotel room that doesn't have an openable window? It's not a pleasant experience. But many people live in homes where this isn't possible, whether that's because of security issues or just the fact that the windows have deteriorated to the point they don't open anymore. If we understand the intent behind these three critical pillars, background ventilation, local exhaust ventilation, and purge ventilation, we can start to ask the right questions, change the narrative from whether a product was just installed to is it delivering on one of those three cases. And I can tell you that changes everything in our conversations with designers, with the supply chain, with contractors, and so on. And look, times are changing, and we're finding elements of ventilation evolving to deal with modern challenges. So perhaps over time, we'll see the development of a fourth pillar or fourth set of approaches to ventilating our buildings that support or supplement the three core pillars. For example, that might be the intelligent diluting of spaces if we can't bring outdoor air in for some reason, whether that's because of extreme temperatures or outdoor air pollution, a little bit like your car that can go on recirculating mode for a period of time, that perhaps we can use the volume of the spaces, if it's available to us, to dilute the space within our buildings, but do so intelligently. We may start to see the introduction of air cleaners into the space, filtration and other treatments to supplement poor air quality that may be coming in, or perhaps clean the air while we're recirculating it in the space. And increasingly, we're starting to see the introduction of demand-controlled ventilation systems or smart ventilation that may be making decisions on our behalf as to the amount of air that we're getting, or making decisions based on other factors like outdoor air quality, grid consumption, all sorts of things. So the challenge for us here is to flip the narrative. Start thinking about the performance outcome of ventilation based on these three principal pillars, and particularly that core foundation of good background ventilation. For it's that sets the property up for success. And look, there are many different ways of providing ventilation for homes, and it's one of the things I hope to do in this video series is start to break those down for you, so do keep an eye out for those on the channel. And if you're interested in this subject more generally, do check out my website at airqualitymatters.net, where you'll find toolkits and courses on just this subject matter. And one of the ways that we can keep an eye on the quality of the air that we're breathing and the performance of the ventilation systems in our home is to monitor air quality. And one of the ways that we do that is with indoor air quality monitors, one of which I've reviewed here. See you next time.